motivation is temporary. Consistency is what you force yourself to do on the days when the motivation isn't there. And consistency beats motivation 10 times out of 10.
The more I work with people, the more I experience life, the more I believe that life itself is best approached as a constant uphill push. If you struggle with the seemingly endless grind of daily life, this video is for you. If you feel defeated or deflated by adversity, if you feel stuck, feel like you want to quit, feel like you can't keep going, I know this is going to help you tremendously. My guest today on the Move the Chains podcast is my friend Karl Gustavson, a retired Navy SEAL, served in DevGru, SEAL Team 6, the elite of the elite, and he's going to share some tips and tactics on increasing our resilience, building an unbeatable mindset, being a forever learner, and a whole lot more. Before we dive in with Gus, I just want to finish this thought on adversity, give you something that you can take away. Most people hope for a life free from adversity, but that's the wrong approach because life does not exist without adversity. Just look around, look in the natural world. Everything is fighting to survive. And we shouldn't want a life free of adversity either. Struggle and challenge are the things that lead to growth and progress. So when those who hope for a life without adversity encounter it, they're unprepared. The sooner we accept the fact that life is hard and fraught with struggle and adversity, the sooner we can start to develop strategies to handle it, to be less fragile, to be assets, not liabilities. And of course, to find some peace and happiness and fulfillment while we're on this journey. When I was in college, I read a great line: enjoy when you can, endure when you must. And that simple phrase helped me tremendously then. And for the last 20 years, it's been something that has really helped me get through a lot. It's just a reminder that life is full of ups and downs. There's seasons, phases, times where we're dealing with struggle. And then there are great times, right? So enjoy when you can, endure when you must. And it reminds me of a saying that the SEALs have. And this is where we're going to pick up with Gus. The saying is, the only easy day was yesterday. So Gus, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
The only easy day was yesterday. What does that mean to you? How has that helped you deal with, even embrace adversity? And just, maybe give us some of your thoughts in general on resilience and adversity.
Yeah. So I think, the idea that the only easy day was yesterday, the reason that resonates so much in the SEAL teams is because you can't look ahead with the expectation of coasting through, right? You can't think about tomorrow is going to be easy, or there's going to be a break on the weekend, or we'll get to second phase or third phase and it's going to be easy. The only easy day is the day that's behind you. And what you have to be prepared for is the challenges that lay in front of you. And it sort of sets the tone for that mindset, right? For you to always be thinking the easy stuff is what's behind me. I have to continue hardening myself for the things that are coming ahead of me. And, I think like you and I've talked about before, I think if you show up to buds expecting them to build resiliency in you and you say, I'm not a strong person, I expect to gain strength and resiliency here, you've already lost, right? That the resiliency and those mechanisms, they already need to be in place so that by the time that you show up, your thought can be like, hey, the easy stuff's behind me. It's the uphill climb that's ahead of me. And you have to be ready for that.
So I love that you highlight the fact that you have that in you, and everybody who gets through buds had that in them before they showed up. So where did you start to develop that? Where did it come from for you? And I think maybe for some of the people listening, they'll be able to hear, oh, well, I've been through something similar, or, maybe I have a little bit more resilience than I realized.
Yeah, I think a lot of the resiliency, at least for me, and a lot of the guys that are coming into buds are coming either straight out of high school or after a brief stint in college. And so a lot of what you find, that common theme, is that the adversity that they went through is predominantly surrounding sports, some sort of athletic endeavor. You find a lot of football players, lacrosse players, rugby players, wrestlers tend to be very successful swimmers. And a lot of what they've learned is not only the athletic attributes that for sure contribute. You have to be fit to make it through the training, right? So there's a fair amount of athleticism that goes into it, but it's also the mindset of going through, really tough, challenging 2-hour sweat sessions in the small wrestling room, or 2.5, 3 hour swim practices. And, it's just yards back and forth. It's just you inside your head having to find that resiliency, or the long summer 2-a-days in football and those kind of things, and like digging deep. And the other things that athletics does for you is it teaches you what it feels like to lose and what it feels like to win. And, and Bud's another saying that we don't emphasize as much, but we do say it a lot, is it pays to be a winner. And so there is a reward for putting out extra effort and coming in first. There's always a reward for those things. And then you also have to learn to sort of mentally and emotionally steel yourself against the times when you don't do as well as you wanted to do, or the races that you don't win, the obstacle courses that don't go well for you, the swims that you don't make the times. You have to have a sort of emotional durability to get through those things and be like, yeah, okay, I failed today, but I won't fail tomorrow. And if you don't have that ability to bounce back, it's going to be a really hard time for you there, because Buds is designed to make sure that everybody fails at something.
You mentioned the long swims, and when you're doing the really long swims, and that's 20, 30, 50, whatever, however many lengths of the pool that ends up being given for whatever given distance, my mind immediately goes to all the times I've done, not necessarily swimming, but similar things where I'm playing those little games in my head, and it's a version of move the chains, right? Like you take this big goal, you chunk it down into, more easily, accomplished bite-sized things. And so what were some of the strategies that you were playing, in your head there to, hey, let me break this into, 4 lengths and make the next 4 faster, or, what did you learn through that process?
So I'll tell you, I remember to this day, and this was probably almost 30 years ago now, we did a swim practice, where we did 40 100s. So 100 meters is 4 lengths of a 25-meter pool. So we did 40 100s with cutoff jean shorts on for increased drag. So I know, it sounds sadistic, right? And each of the 100s was on a certain send-off. So you had to let's say you had 2 minutes to complete that 100 meters. So each 2 minutes, you had to be restarting. So if you did it in a minute 30, you had 30 seconds to rest. If you did it in minute 10, you had 50 seconds to rest. By the time you got about halfway through, you're at the 2 minutes. You're turning around on the wall and you're just sending off for your next one. And so the mental strategy for me, and this really came into play later on in Buds, was break it down into manageable chunks. Do the next 100. And then when you get to 5, I'm at 5, I got 35 left. And then do the next 100, do the next 100. Before you know it, I'm at 10, I'm a quarter of the way through. And sort of that mentally chunking it into those manageable blocks and saying, I'm an eighth of the way through, I'm a quarter of the way through, I'm halfway through, I'm 3/4 of the way through. And when I'm thinking about it and I'm 30 of those 40 through, I'm exhausted. My shoulders feel like my arms are about to fall off. I just want to take those jean shorts off and throw them out of the pool because they feel like they weigh 1,000 pounds at that point. And there's no rest now between the hundreds. And it is all mindset. It is all like, all right, I'm going to grind out this next one. I'm going to grind out this next one. But if you got to 2 or 3 and you're like, shoot, I have 37 of these left, that overwhelming thought process of trying to look at the end before you've even gotten halfway through, I think that's ultimately what leads to a lot of people quitting during Buds, is they're trying to see too far down the line instead of managing the 1 step or 2 steps or 3 steps that's ahead of them. They're trying to think about 6 months from now when they get that shiny gold trident pinned on their chest, and it just becomes overwhelming, right? It's too much to deal with. So you have to take it in manageable chunks.
Yeah, I love that. Something you said in that other previous answer that I wanted to come back to was you talked about the importance of learning what it feels like to win. When we watch other athletes, you watch, maybe a golfer, who's never won a major before, or this young upstart team that, hasn't been to the Super Bowl before. And, they're playing your Chiefs who have won multiple Super Bowls. what are some of the missing elements or what are some of the lessons that somebody or a team might need to learn in order to learn how to win?
Yeah, I think if you look at a lot of the great dynasties, you look at, everybody thinks about Tom Brady and the Patriots, right? And how great they were for so many years. But prior to that, that team went through a lot of adversity. They had a starting quarterback that they thought was their quarterback going forward in Drew Bledsoe. He was the guy, the number one pick, the golden boy of the team or whatever. And he got hurt and they didn't know what was going to happen with Brady. And it was kind of this whole thing. And they had to learn to get through some serious adversity before Brady became the starter and then, went on to win Super Bowls. And same thing with the Chiefs, before they won in 2019, they lost the AFC Championship the year prior. They didn't make it they lost to the Patriots, in fact. They didn't make it to the Super Bowl because they got eliminated in the AFC Championship. And so you have to learn. I think those losses teach you a number of things. Number one, I always think that you learn more from losses than you learn from wins, because when you lose, you learn your weak areas. Here are the places we need to get stronger. Here are the things we weren't doing well. Here are the reasons we lost. When you win, it's easy just to say, oh, we were doing everything right because, look, we won. But I don't think that's always necessarily the case. I think it's important, whether you're winning or losing, to look at the areas where you can get better. It's just more evident when you lose what those areas are. And so I think you see these teams that are coming up. I mean, look at the Eagles won last year. They beat the Chiefs, right? And soundly. But 2 years before that, they lost to. They lost to the same Chiefs, and they came back and they said, what could we do better? What did we not do well enough to beat the Chiefs in 2022 or 2023 that we can correct in 2025?
Yep. Those are all great points. We talked about adversity and some of the things that you experienced at Buds. One of the other things that I think you have had to be really good at with your previous career is flipping the switch, right? And being able to be a high performer, I'll say on command, but I think you and I both know what you're doing when no one's watching so that you can do that. So I guess it's kind of a two-part question, and answer it however you want, but how do you make sure that you're prepared in those bright light situations, whether it's a Super Bowl or a particular mission for you guys? And what specifically are you doing to enable yourself to perform as close to your potential as possible in that moment?
Yeah, so I think there's a multi-part answer here. There's a phrase that I love that that we repeat a lot of times, or that I find myself repeating a lot of times, and that is, we don't rise to the occasion, we fall to the level of our training. Or we don't rise in the moment, we fall to the level of our processes, right? So whatever we put in place in the lead up to that event, whatever the work was that we put in during the early morning hours or the late evening hours, whatever the grind was that we subjected ourselves to, those results are going to be borne out when in the big lights moments, right? You just don't become this Herculean figure because you're put under this big spotlight. And I think that becomes evident in people who haven't put in the preparation. So I think it's important to, remember that it's like those big wins are built in tiny day by day individual gains. That idea of Kaizen, it's getting 1% better, a little bit here and a little bit there in all of those areas. For me personally, it's always been a matter of identifying the skill sets that I felt like I was going to need to rely on. For combat, that's shooting, it's communicating, it's individual fitness, it's battlefield awareness, it's all those kind of things. For me now, whether it's jujitsu or triathlon training or swimming or whatever it is, I know the things that I need to be training because at 46 years old, I've iterated those things enough that I know the work that needs to go in. My jujitsu coach used to like to say, if you're fighting a 3-round fight, you need to have trained yourself for like 10 times that. You need to be ready to fight a 30-round fight. If you're fighting a 3-round fight, you need to have, you need to build that engine, build that gas tank, because when you're there in those moments of adrenaline under the spotlights, if you haven't built that reserve for you to dig down into and draw upon those things, it's not going to be there for you. It's not going to be there just because you want it to be there. So, a good friend of mine likes to tell his kids, he says, what do we do when nobody's looking? We work hard. And that's the answer, right? It's like, what do we do when nobody's looking? We work hard. What do I do when I don't have time to go to the range and shoot? I have a dry fire pistol with a little laser sight at my house. And I use this tool called a Strike Man system that's like literally set up in my living room, from my doorway to my living room, up 25 yards. And I just do dry firing. I dry fire and I dry fire and I dry fire because I can't go to the range that day, or I don't want to spend money on rounds or whatever. And so those kind of things, those little things that you do in the hours when nobody's looking, when nobody's standing behind you, when nobody's encouraging you, when nobody's inviting you to the gym, those things that we do individually pay dividends then when you show up on race day and everybody's like, it's like people talk about, you hear people who have musical groups or bands or whatever, and they'll say it's like it took 15 years of hard work and touring and playing at dive bars to become an overnight success, right? It's like the concept of overnight success it's not a real thing. It's like people put in the hours and the days and the months to get to that point. And you have to know what those processes are, and you have to build them. You have to get comfortable being uncomfortable and identify the things that you need to do. And then you need to do those things consistently, even when nobody else is watching.
Such a great answer. And everything in there is just so well said, so important. I think the one thing that stands out to me and that I'll highlight, just because I think it gets missed or overlooked by so many people, the way that I teach it or would phrase it is, training should be harder than the real thing, right? And when I'm saying that, I'm alluding to exactly what your jiu-jitsu coach was saying, right? If it's a 3-round fight, every single thing that you do in training and in prep for that should not be 3 rounds, right? You need to be training 6 rounds, 7 rounds, 10 rounds, whatever it is, so that no matter what happens, you're not gassing out at the end of the 3-round thing. And so, whatever your thing is, whatever you go do, make sure that you have trained that thing, whether it's the capacity, the endurance aspect, the skill aspect of it, that you've trained it. I love the line from Stephen Pressfield. He says, amateurs do it until they get it right. Pros do it until they can't get it wrong. And that's just, to me, that encompasses all of it. And it's like, we'll use football players as an example. One of my favorite ways to teach this is, let's say, I've got a wide receiver who's catching 100, 200 balls a day out of the jugs machine. Well, okay, that's great. But the jugs machine throws a perfect spiral. And I guarantee you have that thing throwing them right at your chest, and you're doing it in perfect conditions, right? So, start there. That's great. But now let's add on top of that so that you're more prepared for a January playoff game in Buffalo, in the snow, in the wind, at night. Maybe the ball's coming out of the lights, and can you track it? And so, okay, it's great to do the first 100 or 200 on a sunny day at noon, but now let's do it in the rain. Now let's have somebody stand out there with the broom and tip it so it's deflected. And now it's coming here, but you got to reach over here. All of those things play into being able to perform when it matters and to be able to do it when it's not under perfect conditions.
Because the reality is,
so I love that.
It's never under perfect conditions. In the real world, it's never, combat or law enforcement work is not standing at a 7 meter, 10 meter shooting range and shooting rounds into a paper target. That's not the way real life works, right? Catching balls in, contested catches downfield is not going out individually and catching a ball from a jugs machine on a bright sunny spring day. That is just not the way it is. So you have to, I love what you said, you have to train under adverse conditions.
I've got a couple of golfers that I've worked with over the years, and one was an aspiring pro, and he always dreamed about playing in the Masters. And I know that was just this past weekend as we record this, but it was a conversation we had multiple times where I'd say, look, I guarantee you, every time you've played that in your head, every time you visualize that, it's probably a beautiful 70, 75 degree sunny day. What are you going to do if you get there and your first round, your first ever Masters, that Thursday is, it's windy, it's rainy, it's cold. Are you going to be prepared for that? I mean, golf is an outdoor sport. like just like football. I mean, you've got to be able to handle that. And it's one of those things that just really gets overlooked by too many people. So let's jump into, where you are now post-military career. And I think this is an important topic to highlight. And yes, there are a lot of people facing this military transition, but I think you've mastered this transition very well. I know you're still going through it. You're still out less than a year, but I feel like you did a great job of setting yourself up with a lot of opportunities prior to your official retirement date. So I'm curious, again, like I think, I know there are a lot of police officers that are retiring. I know there's a lot of firefighters retiring, even just somebody who wants a career change. There's a lot of fear around that type of a transition. So can you talk about your prep for that, how you were intentional about creating those opportunities, anything else that comes to mind for you as you put yourself in a position to have a successful transition?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'll start with, one of the things that I think we do particularly well in the SEAL teams is we do a good job of bringing sort of outside entities into our network. Meaning, like, we go out and when we're doing skydive training, we go out and we get the best parachute performance team and the best body flying team and the best coaches, and we work with those people. When we go to do these big city training exercises and, wherever it is, Boston or Miami or Chicago, we plug in with the local police departments and we bring them on board, and, we give them some training reps at the end of our training day, and we'll help coach them through things. And sort of an unintended consequence of that is you end up building this very robust network of like-minded people who are very high achieving, very hardworking, very driven in their own fields, who also have very robust networks of people that they associate with. And so we, I think, do a pretty good job of bringing all of those people and sort of broadening that circle of reach that we have. And then along the way, you identify people that you're like, hey, here's an opportunity to potentially work with this person later on down the road. Or here's an opportunity to potentially train with these people. Or here's an opportunity to go do some of the things that these people are doing. Or here's an opportunity to go speak for this nonprofit or do an event with this nonprofit. And just bring those people, sort of making them a part of your big extended family. And that for me was something that really paid off by a year or 2 or 3 out from when I was getting ready to retire, just reaching out to people in that network and being like, hey, what's available? What are people doing? What am I interested in doing? What would I want to do? And, the result of working a 22-year career in the SEAL teams was that when I got out, I didn't want to sit at a desk. I didn't want to punch a clock. I didn't want a 9 to 5. I don't want particularly like a boss that I have to report to. I want to chase passion projects. I want to do things that I love doing. I don't want the work that I'm doing to feel like work. And so those were things that I had in mind. And then, the other thing that I think we had a really good, or I at least had a good series of mentors, people who retired prior to me, who preceded me in retirement, who I reached out to and I was like, tell me about your experience. What did you do? What did you get out? What were the pitfalls? What things should I avoid? And I was able to get a lot of good feedback from people who said, take a few months and don't do anything. Take a few months and just take time to yourself, take care of your household, spend time with your wife or girlfriend, do these different things that you want to do. And then don't jump into anything so early and commit to something fully that you're not really that heart set on doing. And so those were all things that I tried to do. And then, I look for opportunities to do things that are intriguing to me, whether that's, I went down a few weeks ago and spoke at an event for an organization called Boot Campaign that I have done some work with, that really is doing phenomenal work in the veteran recovery space. And I got to go do a keynote down there, and they did it was a sporting clays shoot down in San Antonio, Texas. And then I got to also do the keynote. And that, to me, those things are very rewarding. It's an opportunity for me to give back to that community and to help fundraise for something that I really believe in. And then that doesn't feel like work to me,
That's awesome to hear. So in the beginning, especially like with swimming and buds, you talked about the importance of being able to put your head down and focus on the task directly in front of you. And as we talk about mastering that transition phase, there's a lot of looking ahead, there's planning, there's thoughtfulness. Can you talk about how you know when to do which one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a tough question. It's when to hit the gas and when to hit the brake, when to give yourself time to recover and when to go full throttle and just drive through. Is that what you're asking?
That's definitely a question that is worthy of an answer. I think the way I was looking at it is more like zooming in, zooming out, big picture and immediate task, but take it however you want to take it.
Yeah. So I like to think about it. You have long-term goals and short-term plans of action, right? So I think if you put too much time into thinking about your long-term plan of action, here's everything that I need to do every day for the next 18 months for me to achieve this goal. Number one, I don't think you're going to have the consistency and motivation to stay with it. Number two, I think you're going to spend a whole lot of time planning instead of spending time executing. I think a big part of inertia is getting the ball rolling, right? It's putting the object in motion so that it can stay in motion. So I think
I'd also add into that. We both know, as we talked about at the beginning, there's going to be adversity. There's going to be chaos. It's almost impossible to plan out every single thing that far in advance.
100%. And I think if you do, and there's this tendency to plan so far ahead, and then when that adversity hits, you're like, well, shoot, now all of the plans that I had from X point of adversity forward are changed. That throws my whole world into upheaval. And now I'm at this paralysis by analysis because I don't know where to pick up and go from there. So having the long-term goal and, looking at it like the stock market, the goal is for it to go up, but the stock market goes up and down, It's a consistent upward trajectory, but with many small up and down iterations. And so I think you have to look at it in that sense of like, what am I going to do today and tomorrow and this week to achieve the goal that I'm setting for myself a year from now or 5 years from now? And you definitely don't want to limit yourself to short-term goals. Every goal I set isn't a 6-month goal or a 3-month goal, right? I have 5-year goals and 8-year goals and whatever. But the action plans, am I doing today what I need to do to get done what I need to do this week to be where I want to be at the end of the month? That's my action plan. And then looking ahead and saying, like, if I meet this goal for today, for this week, for this month, and then I continue doing those things, even through adversity, I'm going to continue on that upward trajectory. And hopefully I've set myself up for success with doing SMART goals, right, that are realistic and achievable and time driven and, all those different things. And, if I did a good job of planning and mapping that out in my own mind and hitting the short-term goals, then I should put myself in that position. And then going back to what I said at first, you have to know when is the time to hit the throttle and when is the time to maybe give yourself a little bit of a break and say, hey, I'm stressed out, I'm overtaxed, I'm mentally exhausted. My autonomic nervous system is a constant state of arousal. There's no rest and digest for me. It's all fight or flight. And you have to kind of give yourself those periods of where okay, I'm going to throttle back for a little bit, give myself a day or two, give myself like a deload week, and then I'm going to hit the throttle again. But if you just stay on the throttle, then your body is going to take a deload month or two because things are going to break, right? So it is that sort of brake throttle modulation that I think gets a lot of people.
I would agree. All the things that you said there are great ways that you and I know how to check in with ourselves and determine whether or not it's time to hit the gas or hit the brake. For somebody that may not have experience checking in with HRV or, even know what you were just talking about there with autonomic nervous system and those references, what are some low tech things that people can look out for to help them know when to hit the brake, when to hit the gas?
Yeah. So, a lot of things, I tell people this all the time. I'm like, listening to your body is going to tell you a lot of things. Like, am I constantly hurt? Am I constantly injured? That can be a sign of adrenal fatigue, right? Am I constantly like, when I was going to jujitsu 5 days a week, I found that I was constantly had injuries happening. And part of it was because jujitsu is a violent sport by its nature, but part of it is because my fight or flight response was always aroused. I was constantly in that state of, that autonomic arousal, right? I was like, my body was constantly thinking, hey, you're in a fight, you're in a fight, you're in a fight. And so my sleep wasn't doing good. And I really had to like step back and check in with my body and just discover that 2 days or 3 days a week for me with jujitsu tended to be the optimal train and recovery time for me, right? I know that's not the case for everybody. If you're sick, if you're getting sick a lot, that's a good indicator of, number one, that your nutrition may not be where it needs to be, but also number two, that you're stressed, that you are. And people think of stress as like, well, there's work stress and there's home stress and there's physical stress. But stress is stress. Your body recognizes it as there's something happening that is adverse to your body's, state of status quo, whatever that is. And so there are outside forces affecting you that's causing your body to adapt. And if too many of those outside forces are affecting you, you're overstressed and you'll get sick and you'll lose sleep. So I think easy ways to check in are, am I getting enough sleep at night? Am I going to bed at a certain time? Am I waking up at a certain time? Do I feel rested in the morning? Do I find myself chronically fatigued, chronically sick, chronically injured? And those are all pretty good indicators of that in some fashion or another, you're overstressed. And then I think anybody who talks about any sort of physiological adaptation without going into nutrition, like, am I getting through my days just hammering down caffeine as much as I can? Or do I feel like I have an organic sort of energy because I'm eating clean foods and I'm sleeping enough? And it's like, you really have to have an honest conversation with yourself. If I can't get out of the house without 4 cups of coffee, there's probably something wrong in that equation. But when I first wake up and get out of bed, I should at least have the energy to start my day. And so I think there are little ways that you can check in. And then if you want to dive deeper into it, I think there's definitely like a mental and emotional check-in that we need to do with ourselves, like a sort of, what one of the veteran recovery programs I went through called Virginia High Performance, they have a whole course that they call check engine light. And it's like, just like your car gives you little warning signals of like, what's going on here? Maybe you need to check your fluids, you need to check your brakes, you need to check this, and maybe it's time to check your engine. And you do have to do those assessments. And when you do those assessments, you have to be honest with yourself about like, am I mentally and emotionally okay? Do I feel okay? And, have those conversations. And then sometimes another good thing to do is have 1 or 2 trusted friends who you can go to and be like, get an honest outside perspective, somebody who knows you well, who knows your baseline, and say, based on what you're seeing from me, am I doing good? Or do I look like I'm lacking in one area or the other? Am I, a little bit more closed off or shut down or tired or something? Are you seeing something in me that you would see as being like a sign of something that's not normal?
These are all great pieces of advice. I love the name of that program from Virginia High Performance. Check the engine lights. You mentioned caffeine, and I just want to add on top of that. Look, if you drink a lot of caffeine, if you rely on energy drinks or coffee, you need to understand that caffeine is not an energy source. Energy sources are fats and carbs. Those are substrates that are broken down, and when burned, they provide energy that we measure as calories. Caffeine doesn't actually provide energy. It's like a credit card, actually, where you're running up a deficit. It is an adenosine blocker, and adenosine is the hormone that helps you feel and recognize fatigue. So essentially what you're doing is blunting your ability to feel how tired you are. And the more you do that, the more you run up credit card debt or dig that ditch deeper. So if you're constantly needing caffeine or energy drinks, we need to get in touch and we need to fix that. So,
not to say that caffeine is all bad, right? It's like,
no, not at all. I love,
yeah.
Yeah, I love caffeine. I love coffee. I drink 2 cups a day. I know I'm a slow metabolizer, so my limit is like 200 milligrams a day. My wife weighs half of what I do. She's a fast metabolizer, and she can drink in one day what I might consume in a week. All right, so Gus, you're currently serving as director of operations. Is that correct, for Community First Project?
Yep.
So tell us about this. It's a nonprofit. You're utilizing retired Tier 1 special operators to train law enforcement to respond to high-risk active shooter type situations. Why do they need you guys? And what kind of stuff are you teaching them?
Yeah, so a few years before I retired, a buddy of mine from a teammate, longtime teammate from my squadron, preceded me in retirement. And, like I mentioned, a lot of what we did in the teams was we would go do these big training exercises in major cities. And at the end of the exercise, we would bring in the police department, who had typically helped us out with whatever logistical stuff we needed. And we would train them in some of our tactics. We would give them sort of some of the tactics that we use overseas to, neutralize active shooters, to go into these high threat, high risk situations and keep our guys safe and be able to, successfully engage whatever the threat was. What we realized over the years was that the people who are typically the first on scene responding to active shooters or high threat situations is not the SWAT team. They're usually a 20 to 30 minute call away, if they get called at all. And so the people that show up are the patrol level officers, who are hardworking blue collar people, but don't have this training. They don't have the level of training. Departments don't have the funding. A lot of times they don't have the manning or the time to dedicate to giving these people the training that they needed. So my buddy Sully got out, identified this issue, this shortfall, I guess, and decided that he wanted to do something about it. So he started this nonprofit, Community First Project, with the mission of sourcing high net worth individuals, raising money, and then providing this training, critical training, in our purview, critical training to these patrol level officers at no cost to their departments, which is, those are the 2 key pieces. Number 1, it's training that they need. Number 2, it's no cost to the department. So we'll do these 40-hour blocks, which, to us is probably the minimum requirement. What it should be is this 40-hour block that we teach. And we teach them shooting. We teach them, combat clearance. We teach them how to successfully and safely clear structures that may have active shooters, whether those be schools or homes or municipal buildings, and be successful in those engagements, even if the SWAT team, far before the SWAT team shows up. And a lot of what we're trying to avoid, or what we saw in like Parkland and Uvalde, where you have 20 or 30 officers who have shown up on scene and nobody going inside because they don't have the training. They're not confident in their skill sets. They're not comfortable going in and responding to the active shooter. So they just say, hey, I'm going to take care of myself, instead of doing what they need to do and go save the lives of those children who are in those buildings. And what we want, ideally for us, we're going to give these officers, these law enforcement professionals, the tools and the confidence to respond successfully and keep themselves safe in those situations, because nobody wants to see another Uvalde or another Parkland. And we, not to fault the officers at all. We understand that there is a shortfall in funding and training and time. And even for us right now, with the funding, the fundraising that we're doing, we only have the ability to service about 20% of the departments that are reaching out to us, because we just don't have the money to service everybody. I mean, in a perfect world, it's the Elon Musks of the world would show up to one of our fundraisers and give us $1 billion endowment. We just go be able to train whoever forever. But as it is, it costs about $25,000 to $30,000 for us to go train a department for a week. And we've had a lot of success. We have a lot of really positive testimonials coming out of the departments that we've worked with. Most recently for me, we worked with Worcester up in Massachusetts, and then Fort Worth down in Texas. And we have a couple others coming up, one in North Carolina and another one up in the Boston area. So a lot of really good success with those folks. And our hope is that they take the things that we teach them and they're able to sort of teach we teach them and then they become the teachers. And by the time we come back around, hopefully those tactics have been disseminated department wide. But, realistically, the look ahead for us is there's no end to this work, right? There's thousands and thousands of police departments in the country that need this work. And so we're trying to do as much as we can.
I know you talked about how most of these departments, most of the officers who are first to respond aren't getting the training. I know I've seen this statistic. I can't remember it off the top of my head. Do you have that handy? Do you know how, what the, I guess the requirement is at most of the state levels? Because I'll say, I want to be careful here. I know it's not the officer's fault, but the state mandated amount of training hours is incredibly low.
Yeah. So I think it's, they go through the alert, which is the current existing active shooter training, which is full of shortfalls that I could talk to about all day. It's sort of a legacy training that somebody came up with years and years ago, long before Parkland and Uvalde and Sandy Hook and all these other things. And then they've just sort of said, this is the federal standard for law enforcement, that everybody has to go through this training, and it still exists. And that's what they go through. And then beyond that, most of them get somewhere between 12 and 15 hours of range time and additional training per year. In the SEAL teams, we did about 12 to 16 hours a week of combat clearance type shoot house training.
Right. Well, if anybody listening is a police officer or knows a police officer and you want to bring this to your department, the link will be in the show notes to make it easy for you. But as Gus just pointed out, they're only able to help about 20% of those that are interested. And that's I don't want to say it's sad, but I wish, like you said, Elon or somebody would fund that.
And we're working to shore that up, right? We're working to close that gap. We're doing, we have a fundraiser coming up in Boston. We have a fundraiser coming up in Nantucket. I'm working with some of the Denver SWAT guys and some folks out here to try and set up some fundraisers out in Denver. And the more regionally we fundraise, the more we can service the departments in that area. So we're really trying to shore that gap. And then obviously, we're also limited by the number of retired tier 1 operators that we have who can come on board and teach these tactics. But we love training law enforcement. For anybody who's listening, c1p.org is our website. And you can also be found on the socials at community _first_ project. So,
and I'll put that in the show notes too, so you don't have to remember exactly where those underscores went. Well, one of the other things, Gus, that I love about your approach, when you were in the teams, you took advantage of every opportunity you had to learn a new skill, whether it was another language or, as you said earlier, how to, skydive or whatever those things might have been. Where does that come from? Do you remember some early implanting of that habit?
Probably
was that just
ADHD? which I think for those of us like you and me who have it more under control, I think it's a tool in our tool bag more than it is anything else. But realistically, it's just sort of I from the time I was a young kid, I sort of had a curious mind about different things. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about playing guitar, and she asked if I still play guitar, and I do. I don't. I dabble. I'm not a guitar player by any means, but I like to be able to get on there and make some music with a few chords that I know. But there's always been a curiosity about, it's like I don't just want to shoot. I want to be good at shooting. I don't just want to skydive. I want to be extremely proficient at skydiving. I want to be tandem qualified. I want to be video qualified. I want to, be an accelerated free fall instructor. I want to do all these different things. And, I don't just want to speak another language. I want to speak all the languages. It's for me, it's French and Spanish and Portuguese. And my current project is Russian right now that I'm working on. And it's just this desire to be sort of a perpetual student, right? It's like, there's never like this point where I feel like I've just arrived at like, okay, I know enough and I've done enough and I've seen enough. And certainly I think there are people who, when I was getting ready to retire, were just like, oh, hey, you're going to retire. You'll have your Navy pension and your disability money and you're right off into the sunset. And I was like, well, no. I was like, there's a million other things, if I'm going to be doing corporate public speaking and some of these other things, I want to get good at that. I want to be a polished public speaker. I want to have a presence where I don't get up on stage and mumble and sound like a dum-dum. And so it's like those kind of things that I'm constantly seeking opportunities. And the other thing I think is that you build these really like profound relationships with people when you engage them and ask them to teach you a skill. It's super connective when you are with somebody and you say, hey, teach me how to do this. Can you teach me how to do this? Because number one, I think it shows a vulnerability on your part that I think a lot of people don't expect from people who have come from high achieving organizations, for somebody to show up and be like, yeah, wow, this guy was remarkably humble and wanted me to teach him this thing. And then number two, people who have achieved a high degree of success in whatever they do typically want to teach. They want to pass that along. They are anxious to have an understudy or, somebody who wants to learn from them. And so I think a lot of that, there's some really rewarding relationships and engagements to be found there just from asking somebody, hey, can you teach me this thing that you do? Can you teach me to do that thing?
Yeah, that's awesome. I can't help it as you're talking through that, just that is such a common thread in the people that I want to be around, all the people that I know that I'm drawn to. There's that humility, there's the curiosity, the hunger for knowledge, and a commitment to, as you said, not just wanting to do a thing, but wanting to do it at a really high level. There's the work ethic to close that gap. And I mean, I think if that's you as a listener, you're in the right place, because all of our guests are going to bring their version of those things to this podcast. So on that note, Gus, your final piece of advice for a listener who wants to be more consistent or be better at moving the chains.
So, well, a couple of things. Number one, I think it's important for people to remember that motivation is temporary. Consistency is what you force yourself to do on the days when the motivation isn't there. And consistency beats motivation 10 times out of 10. So remembering that consistency is going and hitting golf balls on the rainy days. Consistency is going and catching the tipped balls out of the jugs machine. Consistency is going on, your long runs, even when it's 40 degrees and windy outside. And consistency is doing the things that you should be doing when you don't want to be doing them. And I think there's a lot of fascinating research about a part of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And the anterior cingulate cortex, more than any other part of the brain, has been shown to create new neural pathways when you do things that you don't want to do. When you do hard things, when you do, let's say like you're doing things like cold water exposure, or you're doing things like running in the cold, or hitting golf balls in the rain, or getting up early, or staying up late, writing a paper when you don't want to write it. When you do the things that are difficult for you to do, that seem objectionable, and you do those things and you persevere through those things, you develop new neural connections, new neural pathways. Your anterior cingulate cortex grows and gets bigger and can do more. And I think it has the end result of making it seem like hard things aren't so hard. Overcoming obstacles isn't so challenging. And I think those are really the things that we should be looking for. Find opportunities to challenge yourself. And then remember that motivation, days that you're motivated, that's fantastic. But be consistent on the days when maybe the motivation isn't there.
Dude, it's so funny that that's where you went with that answer, because I literally, I came across an article a couple of days ago and I forwarded it to Hassan because it was about the AMCC, the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, exactly what you're talking about, and how they're calling it the grit center of the brain. Yeah, and I know he loves studying grit. And so I sent it to him, and yeah, that's such a great answer. I love that. I will put the link to that article in the show notes for everybody to check that one out as well. But it's exactly like you're saying, Gus. I mean, it's when we do those things, we're not just practicing that skill, but we're also developing it and honing it. It's just like the physical, like it's what you talked about with getting the reps of, instead of going to the range, if you're getting the reps in by dry firing and practicing this the way you're doing, the same way you're honing that, it's neurological wiring, right? So, you've heard my rant before on muscle memory, that there's no such thing as muscle memory. Muscles don't have the capacity for memory. It's neurological wiring. And so the same way you would wire in drawing your pistol and getting into proper positioning, whatever that might look like, the more you do it, the more it becomes ingrained. And it's the same thing with behaviors. It just so happens that we have a portion of the brain that, we've found out where that grit center is. So,
and it really is fascinating that there's a part of your brain that specifically when you do stuff that you don't want to do, things that are hard, that part of the brain develops. And that to me is fascinating. It's like we're pre-wired to do hard shit. We are pre-wired. It's in our DNA to say, hey, go do hard things, and your brain will make it easier for you it will make you more resilient. It will make it easier the next time you go to get in that cold tub or hit golf balls in the rain. It makes it easier.
Yep, absolutely. The more you do hard shit, the easier it becomes to do hard shit.
That's it.
Back just in time for the final question. Where can people get more of you?
So Community First Project, obviously, on their website or any of the socials. My personal social media account, KGus245. I'm only on Instagram. It's really the only social media I have. And then, I've done a number of podcasts and stuff. You can usually find those just by giving a quick Google search or whatever. I can't remember the name of it, but the one you did in Normandy, I want to make sure if I can't find it, I will message you, but I want to put a link to that in the show notes for people as well. Give them a quick synopsis of what that was. So last June, almost a year ago this June, had an opportunity to go with a jump team of retired SEALs and go jump into the 80th anniversary of D-Day. While we were there, a couple of guys came over to do media stuff for us. One of them is a retired SEAL by the name of Kevin Vance, who also happens to be a producer on the John Barenthal podcast. And so he was doing an offshoot of the John Barenthal podcast called Echoes. And so he sat down with me and we did an interview, talked about a broad range of different things, my career, how the Normandy jumps and the 80th anniversary of D-Day coincided with the end of my 22-year SEAL career and all those kind of things. So really fun conversation with him, and ended up turning out to be, I think, a really good podcast, one of the best podcasts I've done. And Kevin's a tremendous guy. If you have a chance to look him up, Kevin Vance, he does some work in Hollywood, and he's produced a number of podcasts, and really, really solid human being. So we did that one, Echoes. It's called Echoes Podcast.
Yeah, so if you like what you heard from Gus today, I'll check out the show notes, the description here. We'll put a link to that. The video is phenomenal. You get to see some footage of those jumps. Gus, I'm also realizing that this is the first time that you've been on the podcast where we actually said your name. You've been on several times in the past, but it was as an anonymous active duty tier 1 operator.
G for a while.
Well, man, I can't thank you enough for hanging out with us and sharing some great tips and strategies today.
Yeah, it's always tremendous talking to you. I always feel like I learn a lot from you, and hopefully the listeners get something out of it. Great to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, we'll have to do it again sometime soon.
Absolutely.
So if you've got questions for Gus, send them in, and maybe we'll bring him back and do a listener Q&A. I'm glad you're here. Excited for the conversations and guests that we're going to bring you in the future. Each week, we'll bring you tips and tools that you can use to move the chains in your day-to-day life with real-world examples from my life, from my coaching clients, friends, and other high-performing, successful people, so that you can see how they have their own version of move the chains that fueled their successes. That's it. Thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe to the Move the Chains podcast wherever you listen to podcasts so you get notified of new episodes. We'll catch you on the next one.